Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Healing Mindset with me, David Drabkin, and my guest today, Dr. Abid Nazeer. Lovely to see you again, not in person this time, but remotely. How are you doing today, Abid?
Great. It's great seeing you again, David. It's been a while since we got to last connect. I appreciate you calling me on this podcast and happy to be here today.
Yeah, it's great to see you. The first time, and I think the only time we met, we have to mention it was the first ever Wonderland conference in Miami, and that was in the kind of the heydays of the boom of the psychedelic bubble, and there was great energy there, and a lot's changed since then. And in a sense, the folks that are still doing the amazing work today are the ones that are prioritizing just clinical treatment, in my opinion. Real kind of patient care that know the business of looking after people rather than just the business of making money. Obviously, you can do both. So you've gone through a lot in the last couple of years. The first question I want to ask you before we get into that is, tell me originally, Abid, why did you become a psychiatrist? Like really, what was it about psychiatry and wanting to work with patients in that way that you just knew you were going to put that many years into getting the training and qualifying?
Well, so with that, let's go way back then. That's a great question to think about it. When I kind of rewind the clock, it really kind of, I think probably started, in high school, eighth, ninth grade, where, you're like the one where a lot of friends will come and talk to you. People tell you you're a good listener. It started like that, where I started thinking, maybe that's a good field for me. And then when you start seeing people, friends or family go through any sort of mental health struggles, I actually saw some people close to me go through it and respond to treatment really well. And I'm like, wow, this is, that just really drew me. So I only went to medical school to be a psychiatrist. Like that I wouldn't have gone to any other specialty, right? Like otherwise I'd be doing something totally different. So my whole goal was probably by 9th, 10th grade, I had already decided that this is the field for me, is psychiatry, that this is a really good way to help people. What I probably thought that I was getting into and was going to become was a psychologist or a therapist, the listening part. Like I didn't fully understand the big kind of true differences between, psychotherapy and psychiatry in a way, the biological side and the psychological side. But that wasn't a negative. Like when I got into, med school and residency, it then really, I enjoyed the biological side of it anyways. So I think I found my niche at that point. But yeah, it was always my kind of calling to want to help people, and just seeing how the field like has interventions that can help was kind of amazing to me. And to be honest, like looking back at what we had then, that was in about 2001, let's say, around there when I graduated medical school. Compared to now, we have way more tools now. It's just a way more exciting time even in the field.
That's amazing. You knew what you wanted so young. And I did a bit of research on you, Abid, and it also appears you used to be a bit of a mean DJ. So was that an option? Was that something that you wanted to do, or are you still doing it? And I know you're in Chicago, so was it Chicago House that you used to play? What was your genre of music?
It was more pop, hip hop. The DJing was different. I think I DJ'd for a while and I enjoyed it, and just more as a hobby. I think I quickly realized that I'm going to probably financially do better as a physician than as a DJ. So it was more like a side gig, and then producing music for several years. And with a friend of mine, who's also a physician, who I'm still making music to this day. I'm not involved as much now. I'm way too busy running my clinics, and but I think that's something that I'm going to get back into as soon as I have the time.
Oh, I can't wait. And do you share that with your kids? Like, do you show them how to kind of produce music?
Yeah, no, they know, they're fans of the music I've made so far. They like it. And then, I sometimes get them in the studio and try to teach them a little bit on it. But, they're young still. As they get older, I think their interest level might peak to actually really want to learn it. That would be great. I would help them with that for sure. But yeah, it's producing is one thing. DJing is DJing is a lot of work, actually. Mobile DJing is a lot of work. Yeah. Producing is a little more fun. You can do it in your own house, in your studio, versus have to lug around big speakers and set up and, DJ a party or something.
Awesome. Okay, thanks for answering that little aside. You are the kind of psychiatrist that's double boarded also in addiction medicine, and that's a field I've worked in a lot, Abid. So I'd love to know why that felt like something important. You wanted to go so deep into the expertise around psychiatry and addiction together.
Yeah, it didn't come naturally to I was going to become certified in addiction medicine. But I think what happened is like once I started my own practice, in the early days of it, you have to build a practice and you look for other kind of side gigs and to do and side work to do. And I started working with a company called Symmetria Recovery. It's an opioid treatment program, but they had a very kind of novel like clinical care model. It was like a methadone clinic, but they were focused on outcome data and comprehensive quality care, good facilities, offer behavioral health, have everything under one roof, and then leverage the ability to dispense medications, to increase intervention with patients when they are struggling and relapsing and need more help versus, dispense more medication and bring them back a little less frequently when they're progressing. I learned a lot there. We grew from 2 clinics. Then when I left there, it was about 12 clinics. I was the chief medical officer. Part of that's when I got into that and really, and there was an opioid epidemic that was just like on fire at that point. So we're talking about 2017 to
Yeah.
2020, that range. It was really bad, and the opioid overdose deaths were increasing dramatically. So it was like I felt almost a calling that I needed to do something in that field, and plus to be
Mhm.
chief medical officer for a growing addiction treatment company. I needed to get board certified, so I decided at that point to do that as part of my work with them. And to this day, yeah, still do a lot of addiction work, but it's
Beautiful.
rewarding and we're making some progress finally. I think the opioid overdose death rate's finally coming down. So,
Great. And I think there's so much potential for psychedelics to treat addiction. There's some great research happening, different centers around the world for that. And I just want to thank you for stepping into the void there of realizing there's an epidemic. I need more information to be a leader in my community. So you did that addiction boarding. And at that time during the epidemic, Abid, I was actually at a hospital in New Jersey. I was the addiction specialist for the hospital, and I was a social worker because we didn't have a doctor or a psychiatrist that was double boarded, that didn't have that expertise. So it really held us back on what we could do, because I could say what I think we should do. I chaired the opioid task force as well, but I'm a social worker. I don't have MD after my name, so we didn't get as much done. But having an MD really just says, this is a problem. We need to just put our heads together. We have to do something. We have to be bold. So I think that stands you really well in good stead for now. You're, doing the psychedelic therapy as well, which is somewhat radical. Why do you think you're able to step into these voids, to be the pioneer, to kind of make, I think you were the first prescriber in ketamine to deliver ketamine assisted treatment in Chicago, weren't you?
yeah, it was the first probably the second overall clinic by like a week in the state of Illinois, but first psychiatric based ketamine clinic where it's really meant to treat, like the specialty is mental health and treating mental health, and ketamine as the primary modality. Yes, it was the first one in state of Illinois. That was in 2016. And yeah, my model evolved a lot since then. But with your question about just, I guess, being able to go into these, it really I think it all started with opening the practice and offering ketamine treatment, because at that time there weren't any, right? So there was a kind of a big leap to do at that point. It wasn't very well known, and maybe even frowned upon in general in some circles in the healthcare community. It was new, right? And I understand it. They need data, safety data, like new things can be scary and we need to be cautious. But to be honest, it was like when I opened the clinic I saw the data on ketamine and I saw how well it could work, how fast it can start helping, which gives people that light at the end of the tunnel, that hope for them to keep going by doing a treatment and quickly getting results versus taking weeks and weeks and weeks for medicine to start working, and will it even work to the full benefit. Once I saw the first patient respond to it, who had already tried ECT, had already tried every medication, had done genetic testing, had done everything, and nothing was working. This was kind of like the last resort. And really, within 2 infusions, I mean, it was like a night and day difference. And that right away, I never saw that in all my career in psychiatry. So that's what kind of, it's because I passionately believe these have a place and they work so well, which then opens up the door for me to think of what else is out there that is promising. And when you look at risk benefit ratio, might be worth trying to offer. And that's kind of why I got into TMS and Spravato, psychedelics, and all of that is because we need more tools, and I believe that they can help, and there's a place. And it's the eye test. You just see it as a clinician, the difference in approach by using some of these newer treatments.
Yeah.
And that's what kind of makes me feel emboldened. I'm not doing it like for any other reason, but hey, this works and we need it. We need more tools. That what makes me a little bit more ready to jump into a new field. In an addiction, it could be a little controversial because, okay, we know ketamine can be misused. People can develop a dependence on ketamine specifically. However, at the same time, there are a lot of studies that have been, that have come out over the years that show how well it could work for treating addiction. And I do leverage it for treatments like that to help get people off Xanax or help them stay sober from alcohol or cocaine. And it can work if you do it the right way in a supervised setting and really try to, follow the right protocols. And there are limits to how I use it. I don't get too aggressive with it. I don't necessarily do like daily home dosing or any of that. Everything's in the clinic, everything's regulated, supervised, and done with, certified specialists in this field. So.
Love it. Before we go into the particular treatments you offer in detail, including a bit of science, I'd love you to geek out with us on. Tell us, just generally speaking, Hopemark Health is the name of your clinic, and there's a number of them. Just paint a picture for folks that are tuning in. What do your clinics look like? What services are offered there? What kind of people walk through the door? How, is it insurance based? Is it private pay? Just tell us all about Hopemark.
So, the practice started first, it was called Advanced Psychiatric Solutions, way too long of a name and not very trademarkable. So, we eventually rebranded to Hopemark, but it started in 2016, first, just as like the only thing I offered was ketamine treatment. And that changed really quickly because within a few months of starting the clinic and offering it was IV ketamine infusions for treatment-resistant depression and PTSD. And then I was, realizing that, okay, there are a lot of patients now coming from other ketamine clinics that were opening up that had questions. What do I do with my, my SSRI or, what do I do with therapy now that I'm doing, getting better from ketamine treatment? And the ketamine clinics couldn't answer that for them necessarily because there weren't any, psychiatrists involved in those clinics. So then I realized that, wait, that's my need. That is kind of the intersection I'm at, is how does this all fit with the traditional mental health treatments? And plus, I figured if I could start treating some patients for general psychiatry, then there'll be a lot of patients who might qualify for that treatment, and I can educate them on it, and they'll already be under my care, and I'll, start offering the other treatment once it's appropriate and if it's needed. So I started, taking insurance, doing general psychiatric medication management, and then it's like it kept ballooning that, wait a second, this should be a comprehensive setup because, like, on the traditional side, then we had psychotherapy. We have, individual psychotherapy, group psychotherapy. One of our therapists does neurofeedback. One of our therapists is, really heavily focused on the ketamine assisted psychotherapy program and is certified in that. So we kept adding traditional treatments and other ways of doing what we call interventional psychiatric treatments. So transcranial magnetic stimulation, which I'm sure we can talk about that too. And that fits really well because it's really used for treatment-resistant depression. So it's the same person walking through the door who's suffering from depression or anxiety, PTSD, who's tried medications and hasn't gotten the results that they're looking for. That it's the same person, whether some people might be more suited for ketamine, some might be more suited for TMS, transcranial magnetic stimulation. But because it makes sense to not only have one, if somebody's prefers one or tries one and doesn't work, we have another option for them. That's the beauty of having a comprehensive kind of interventional setup where we have traditional Some of our patients just get regular antidepressant prescriptions or therapy, and some have tried all the interventional treatments, so it's a mix. Like we offer all of it, and it's all in a kind of a setup where we're able to even sometimes mix and match them and combine different interventional treatments and try to get even a more synergistic benefit. And people who walk through our door could be anybody. And we see 18 and up, but generally speaking, it all walks of life, from professionals, just you name it, teachers, lawyers, factory workers, everybody. But our populations generally, we take insurance. So everything we offer is actually insurance covered, except for IV ketamine treatment. So Spravato, TMS, general psychiatry, and all of that is insurance reimbursed. So we do have patients who, have to pay out of pocket, and we try to make it affordable for them to receive treatments like IV ketamine. We discount it, we do sliding scale fees, and we make payment plans. But if somebody's can't afford something like IV ketamine, at least we have things like Spravato, which is covered by insurance, intranasal S-ketamine. So that's the whole point: access to care, comprehensive setup, tracking outcomes, and really individualizing the treatment for a patient, giving them options to fit what they need. So each one's different on your demand and time and somebody's willingness to try. Somebody might not be willing to try IV ketamine, but will be very okay trying TMS because it's FDA approved, things like that.
Great answer. And I'm getting a feeling that interventional psychiatry, as you said before, means having your mind open to new treatment modalities and using that kind of risk-benefit ratio and analysis to see, well, can I bring this treatment in to help these kinds of patients, to add this in, to fit in, maybe there's a gap here. And so you've got a lot of different treatments. And I love that you're offering neurofeedback, especially. That's great. TMS, brilliant. Spravato, to be insurance covered and to offer the psychotherapy piece and just to offer the medication management. You're basically a community mental health center, which might not seem as sexy to some, investors who are out there, but it means you're busy, means you are trusted, and it means you've got an amazing just loyalty, I'd say, as a community provider, and having worked in the field. So it's really clear that that's what you're doing. And how many clinics have you got now?
So we have 6 clinics across Chicagoland area. One of them is a pure therapy location where it's all psychotherapy services. The other 5 offer all the other services I mentioned. So yeah, we have been growing. I mean, in the last, 2-3 years, had a lot of growth, and we've been opening up more. Hopefully we'll continue to open up more locations. So, in Chicagoland area, for a clinic to offer all the services, including IV ketamine and everything else I mentioned, a lot of clinics will offer maybe, let's say, TMS and general psychiatry, or just therapy and psychiatry, or just Spravato and TMS, or TMS alone. But to offer IV ketamine with everything and traditional, so there's not too many of those out there, and we're one of the larger ones doing that model of care here. Ultimately, we don't want to shy away from general like psychiatry practices. We do general med management. My only problem with med management is that the success rates are not that great. The STAR-D, the STAR-D study back in 2006, largest study looking at antidepressant sequential treatment algorithms and comparing them to each other. Bottom line was that really only 37% of people on their first medicine achieve remission. And then it goes to 30% when you try your second med, and then it drops to 14% on your third med trial. And so many people have walked into our doors who've already tried 5, 6, 10 medicines, and they're qualifying for that. So you're getting depressed quicker, more chance of a relapse if you keep trying medicines, more chance of adverse effects, and less chance of remission. So you're like, you just keep heading into a corner where it's going to be harder to get out of. That's why, for a lot of these new treatments, they typically would want that you've tried two medications and not gotten results, and you've tried therapy. That's a lot of people who have depression, who have tried two medicines and therapy and are not where they want to be. So that's kind of why we offer it early, these interventional treatments. As soon as somebody's eligible for it, we recommend doing it, just because we don't want to keep trying med after med after med. Now, there's people that come in on a lot of meds, and we use these other treatments. Sometimes it helps us get down on how many meds they're taking too. So, and the way that meds work, the traditional meds, and the way that new treatments work are completely different. Like, they're, we can talk about that if you want, David, but going into like the actual mechanisms of action is completely different for all these interventional novel treatments versus, SSRIs and psychopharmacology approaches.
Yeah, I'd love to go into the specifics of ketamine mechanisms of action, particularly Spravato, and you are a key opinion leader for Johnson & Johnson, so you provide education and messaging to prescribers, but also to patients. Before we go there, quick question around what you were just saying with Spravato treating patients with treatment-resistant depression. So there was this requirement that those patients had to have tried two medications that didn't work and to still be on an antidepressant. But I think in the last few months, they actually removed that requirement to still be on an antidepressant, which means more patients now can access Spravato as a monotherapy without needing to be on an antidepressant right now. So I don't know, have you seen any changes in the kinds of patients you can now treat because of that change to the label the FDA approved for Spravato, or what do you expect to come in the future because of that around accessibility and just giving you flexibility?
Yeah, no, definitely. That's, you're right. So it started, the very first indication, March 2019, Spravato was, released and basically FDA approved at that time and launched. And the indication was treatment resistant depression in conjunction with an oral antidepressant. So it was an augmenting agent. And so somebody's on an antidepressant, then you add Spravato. And they got it FDA approved that way. And for years, it was like that. They came with the second indication, came like a year or two later, where it was actually not about treatment resistant depression. It was major depressive disorder with suicidal ideations. And that was the second indication. And then just, I think, January of this year, the last monotherapy. So now you can do it without an antidepressant. So for all those years, like, some patients were like, I've tried 20 meds. Why do I have to get on a medicine again? And that was the way that it was approved. We have to stick kind of with the FDA label. Now, I don't know if patients were like, I don't know if they're actually taking their oral antidepressant at home, right? I mean, I can't force that issue. I mean, I can prescribe it and tell them this is how it was studied. This is how we have to write it. But I'm sure there are probably a lot of patients who may not have been taking their oral antidepressant, even though they were filling it. In my mind, I always felt like Spravato might be doing the heavy lifting here because of how it works. So I'm glad now. The difference is I don't have to have that. I don't have to have that discussion. Just kind of say, hey, we gotta keep you on oral antidepressant. It's approved as monotherapy now, and that it just validates what I've always felt about Spravato and how it works. That it probably doesn't need the oral antidepressant, and it'd be strong enough of a benefit to get approval on it as a monotherapy, and which I'm glad they did. In the future, I don't know. I'm sure there'll be more indications that they study and get approved. I don't, necessarily want to talk about which ones they're studying. I don't know for sure. And plus, that's kind of a little gray area to say what's coming down the pipeline with Johnson & Johnson, but I'm sure there'll be more indications in the future, because it's just a matter of studying the medicine for an indication and seeing if you can, get enough results and to get it approved for that. I would be great if they added more indications. But yeah, that's kind of where Spravato is. I think, it's our largest interventional service line in our practice. We have a lot of patients who come in looking for that treatment because, it is FDA approved. It is insurance covered, makes it accessible. That's the only real knock on IV ketamine, which is a great, great treatment. And we use it for so many conditions and have great results. But sometimes people, they need something they can afford. So.
Got it. Great. It's now time to go deep into the ketamine world. So tell me, in your opinion, Abid, professionally speaking, what do you love about how ketamine works? What about its mechanisms of action, particularly in comparison to traditional SSRIs, that really it gives you more options, that you just see, oh, wow, this is how it works, particularly with depression, TRD, and MDD?
Yeah, so forever the field was like psychiatry was very psychoanalytic and psychotherapy focused, right? The kind of the Freudian era and that they're up, through the 40s, 50s, 60s. By the advent of like when fluoxetine or Prozac, was released, the concept, what we call the monoamine neurotransmitter hypothesis. So we're talking about basically neurotransmitters in your brain that are going, through pathways, through neuronal tracks. The three big ones we're talking about are serotonin, dopamine, and norepinephrine. They all do different things, right? Serotonin's more of the feel good neurotransmitter. It can be low in people that have obsessive thinking, OCD, ruminations, panic. Then there's like dopamine, which does reward, motivation, drive, pleasure, focus. So that could be low in depression if you have no drive or, will, or it could be low in ADHD. It could be overactive in things like schizophrenia, the dopamine level. And then norepinephrine's like in the middle, like energy, pain threshold, the, sense of well-being. So for decades, we're having serotonin reuptake inhibitors. We're trying to elevate serotonin levels. Some are doing norepinephrine, dopamine, combinations of those. But we weren't really sure if that is the true etiology of depression and anxiety disorders. We don't really, it's a hypothesis.
Mm-hmm.
And they're involved, right? They're involved in emotional regulation, but we weren't really sure that you can't say that was the cause, because it could be multiple factors involved. And when we look at etiology of depression, and there are other neurotransmitters like glutamate and GABA, which is now we're getting into what ketamine and psychedelics and some of the newer treatments work on glutamate specifically, which is like the gas pedal of the nervous system, and GABA is like the brakes of the nervous system.
Mm-hmm.
But they all lead to the concept, it's a big buzzword, neuroplasticity, meaning when you're depressed, you have, and I'm talking on a physiological level first, that you have neuronal highways that they call it pruning. You have the dendrites of the neuron, and they basically, go away. So it's like a bush losing all the leaves in the winter, or it's like potholes on a highway. You have disconnect there. Now, BDNF is brain-derived neurotropic factor. It's natural to the body, and you're signaling an increase in BDNF through a lot of these new treatments like ketamine. And what that does is basically ketamine is like a construction foreman coming and calling a construction crew to fix the potholes. You're waking up the brain, you're repaving those roads. So physiologically, you're actually basically like doing neurogenesis in your brain and kind of making new pathways there. But in the real world sense, what does that mean? When you're neuroplastic, you actually can formulate a new thought process easier and stick with it easier. The glutamate levels are high, so you're more motivated. You're able to look at things differently. So one thing is the field went from psychoanalysis, though once Prozac and the monoamine neurotransmitter hypothesis came out for decades, it swung to the other end, script after script after script. Therapy and psychiatry, like there was a bigger fracture between the two, like less psychiatrists were doing therapy work. It was mostly therapists doing it. And just, it was a very fractured kind of approach. Ketamine, I feel, has brought it back to the middle in a bit, and psychedelics in the future, if they can get FDA approved, I feel that they are doing the same thing, which is that junction between the psychological benefit and the medical benefit, because the medical benefit is what I'm talking about with neuroplasticity, like triggering your brain to basically rebuild pathways. There's also quieting of the default mode network, which is basically your self dialogue and negative thoughts in your brain when you're not doing something consciously. It can quiet that down, which is usually very active when you're anxious or depressed. Your thoughts can be negative and loud, and it gives you a sense of quiet from a physiological level by dampening the activity of that default mode network. And it can balance the gas pedal and the brake of the car, which is the glutamate and GABA. You can't push both together. If you push GABA, meaning take, let's say, a benzo, Xanax, drink a lot of alcohol, take a lot of opiates, it's going to slow the whole nervous system down. And then your gas pedal's not working. You start getting depressed. And then when the like, let's say alcohol or benzo leaves your system, and you get a rebound, the gas pedal goes haywire and you get overactive glutamate, so your heart starts racing, you're anxious, and you have to take more of something to
Mm.
pump the GABA, pump the brakes again before your car goes off the road. So it's like it's hard to maintain the car going at a nice smooth kind of pace. You need that homeostasis, and I think a lot of these newer treatments can help kind of do that in terms of the balancing of glutamate and GABA. So now you're at the point where you have a medical benefit, but all of that is also at the junction of the psychological benefit. And that's where we get into the concept of ketamine assisted psychotherapy, or Spravato assisted psychotherapy, or future psychedelic assisted psychotherapy, because you are now loosening up all the rigidity in your brain. You are able to, for ketamine specifically, like dissociate. It's a dissociative anesthetic. It's been around for decades. It's a very low dose. It's not an anesthetic dose. You don't fall asleep. You're awake through the infusion. It makes you feel this kind of altered out-of-body sensation where you might look at either in an abstract way, feel connected and get a sense of peace, some meaning. I have one patient who was grieving the death of her mom. It was complicated bereavement, really she was a caregiver for years for her mom. And then it felt like she felt like a cloud floating and merged with another cloud, which was her mom during the infusion experience, and basically gave her a sense of connection and peace. Right? I've heard a lot of different versions of abstract kind of meaning that you can get out of it, all on its own, all on your own, just through that altered state of consciousness. But then on top of that, you might have trauma, and you're able to look at your trauma from a whole new vantage point, very clearly, but a new perspective, and without all that associated negative emotion. That's why, especially in cases of trauma, it's really important to have a ketamine assisted psychotherapist with you to help integrate that and have a safe therapeutic container, and really try to walk you through that journey and integrate that experience into the real world. So like that, now you're getting the medical benefit. Like Spravato is a lot more of the medical side because of the way it's not as dissociative as ketamine typically will be. We have only 2 dose options. It's not as bioavailable, but the concepts of that neuroplasticity are still happening. In IV ketamine, we can get a lot more dissociative like that and use that to our advantage psychologically for a breakthrough. So that is getting a little more to the root conflict, plus making your brain prime for regeneration and recovery, rather than, I guess, just kind of taking the med, having some sexual side effects, having fatigue daily, weight gain, and then you feel like you're 20-30% better and somewhat numbed, but you're not at the root cause of it. Like, it can help some people. It's all you need is a regular traditional antidepressant, and it can work great. But there are a lot of people that's not enough for. So that's the beauty of like the newer treatments. It's looking at both elements of psychological improvement, root conflict resolution, and neuroplasticity. Sorry, that was a lot. I know that was a long drawn out answer on.
No, that was perfect. And I love the emphasis you're placing on real healing. Like, we're not talking about symptom reduction. It's not just that we need a serotonin pill. We need more than that, especially if there's trauma involved, that we need therapy as well. But there's something within us seeking a return to homeostasis, and that's kind of healing, that's remission, that's resolution. And it might not even need lifelong taking of medication or of ketamine. For some people that could be indicated, but for others, it might just be, I did some really deep healing, something very powerful came up. I feel differently. Like my wiring has now kind of changed its circuitry, and I feel like a different person, and I can handle the ups and downs a little bit differently. So the emphasis on healing, that kind of reset is awesome. I want to talk about TMS in my next question, but before we do, just talk us through the options of working with ketamine with your patients, Abid. So we've got IV, intravenous, we've got Spravato, which is a nasal spray, and then we've also got IM, intramuscular injection, which I think is used less often typically. How would you determine which one is best for which kind of patient? Would you potentially combine them and try one first and another one second? Just talk us through, just generally speaking, what some of your techniques would be. I guess triaging, assessing, and just responding to how the patient, is reacting to the treatment.
Yeah, so like the first part of that discussion is really like you brought up the routes of administration of ketamine specifically and talking about that element. So yeah, you're right. We focus mostly on IV ketamine. I like IV ketamine because it's 100% bioavailable. So everything that I deliver in the IV bag is goes into your bloodstream, meaning that I know exactly how much I'm delivering and how fast I'm delivering it. And if somebody needs this extra, let's say of some medicine for nausea or anxiety or blood pressure, I can push that IV, I can slow the drip and make it less intense. Some people want it to be less intense. It's a hard experience for them. Some people want it to be more dissociative because it actually kind of helps them further as they're working through some of their issues. So control of how the experience is why I like IV. And there's probably the most data around IV to support its use. IM, intramuscular, and there are clinics that's what they focus on too. Ours doesn't. We do it only if we can't have a hard time with the IV line for a certain patient, we might do that. But other clinics, that's all they do. It is easier to administer, right? It's just a shot. It's a shot in the arm, in the shoulder with an IM needle. And the difference, it's pretty bioavailable. I think it's about 90 to 96% bioavailable. So a lot gets in your system, but it can be a different, what we call pharmacokinetic curve. So the way the blood levels rise and fall is different than IV. It's a little less of a smooth hill, a little more of a mountain kind of peak and drop. So the peak level of IM ketamine could be higher than IV, and that could make it a lot more dissociative and intense. So that could be good for somebody with a therapist who's handling it and trying to get that big breakthrough psychologically. Ego death, what we call, like redefining how they look at themselves or processing the trauma in an impactful way. However, it could also trigger a lot of anxiety because I'm treating patients all the way from 17, 18 years old, all the way up to 93 years old, you name it. I have tried these treatments in my clinics, all ages. So it really, not everybody's, I guess, wants to have that intense out of some people. It's more the neuroplasticity. And so we want to keep it less dissociative, and IV can do that. But there's also oral lozenge troche form where you can take that. We don't offer that. We might consider starting that with psychotherapy in our clinic because it's more of a low dose feel. You're not very dissociated. You're very capable of having a therapy session with it. With it in your system in a very low bioavailability. It's could be less than 30%. So. But that's a whole different form too. And intranasal, some people will do generic ketamine compounded into intranasal formulation. I don't endorse to do ketamine treatments like at home. I think it should be done always with a clinic supervising and with specialists there. There are places that will, send people ketamine at their house. But for me, there are blood pressure changes and there's psychological crises that can happen. It's good to be in a controlled setting. But intranasal is a very good form. It's pretty bioavailable, more than 70% bioavailable. But Johnson & Johnson's product Spravato was the first FDA approved compound from the ketamine family for a mental health indication. So that is S-ketamine is one of the basically parts of the molecule of ketamine, right? So it's probably the more potent element compared to our ketamine. It's a nasal spray and it's done in the clinic. Patients are monitored for 2 hours in the clinic after they take their dose. That one is because there's only 2 doses. It's not as dissociative. Now, we still do psychotherapy with patients in their second hour of that monitoring or in the hour right after their monitoring period. So you're still able to converse. For some patients that's really helpful. It's probably not as intense of an experience as IV ketamine. Some people it can be, but it is a more frequent kind of a protocol like that. You do 2 times a week for a month, then you do weekly for the next month, and then you maintain on it. They have safety data going out 6 years. 5 years of it is validated statistically, showing that it continues to work and it doesn't cause an increase in adverse effects over time. So we've had patients coming weekly. It's maintenance is every 1 to 2 weeks with Spravato, and doing that for 5, 6 years now and doing good, and it continues to work predictably. But it's not that it's causing a amazing dissociative transformational experience every time, every week for years. It's pretty tolerable. It's more of a routine. They like their time coming into the clinic. They're like family members. We get to know them really well because they come so regularly, and they've tried other treatments, and it keeps them functioning in life. IV ketamine, you probably have a little better chance, especially when you add this assisted psychotherapy, to have that psychological breakthrough. We do 6 treatments over 3 weeks, but then we optimize it and we start spacing it out more and more. Typically, we're adding like a week at a time to the interval between treatments, and then we'll plateau somewhere where you can't get much further benefits. That's one of the negatives on ketamine. Is for some people, they might use it, get through it, have a breakthrough, and be good and not need more. But there are a lot of people, especially if you've tried a lot of treatments and you have a long history, that you will probably want to maintain on it to continue doing well until something else comes along that has better durability of benefit. But our average maintenance interval for ketamine in our clinics about every 5 to 6 weeks. We have some patients who come every 9 months and do a little mini series of 3 treatments that are good all year. And then there's patients who would only last like a couple of weeks. Now, that's what matters. So a lot of times we'll start with ketamine because we can just get going on it. We don't need the insurance authorization, but a lot of times we'll submit for insurance authorization for Spravato. But a lot of times you'll get improvement with ketamine, but you're not maintaining on it, though. You will maintain on Spravato because financially it's a lot more accessible.
Right.
And if you can't go 2, 3 months at a time between infusions and stay well, and you're only going 3 weeks at a time, why not just get like in a product that is insurance covered, FDA approved, and that one you're maintaining every 1 to 2 weeks, but it's a lot easier financially, logistically to maintain on that than IV ketamine. But some people, if they're stretching their interval on ketamine and get out to every 2 months, 3 months, then they stick with ketamine. So that's how we decide. It's about affordability, urgency, because we can't start Spravato overnight. We need to take 1 to 4 weeks to get them started on it. And then some people might be heading towards a hospital stay or getting suicidal thinking. IV ketamine is going to be the quickest, robust kind of way to approach it. Our internal data that we've looked at so far shows 74% of people are getting a full response or remission from it. So really good compared to the numbers I was telling you with traditional meds.
Awesome work. Thank you. So we've covered ketamine in quite a lot of detail now. So I'd like to add in TMS, Abid. So transcranial magnetic stimulation. I don't know as much about this. So if you can just tell me, but everyone who's tuning in, what is it? What is it used for? What conditions does it treat? And then we'll start to kind of weave in of how do you combine TMS with Spravato and IV ketamine? And how might you kind of stack that and just be able to respond to each individual patient's needs in the moment? So it's just starting TMS. Give us, your kind of basic understanding of what it is and how it works.
Yeah, so transcranial magnetic stimulation, first of all, that was, I think it was FDA approved in 2012, but it was really kind of available since like 2008. So it's been around. So it's, a lot of people don't realize it's been around a while. And it's one of the interventional psychiatry treatments focused on neuromodulation. So your brain basically has, it has a chemical circuitry, but it also has electrical circuitry as well. If you think about it, there's action potentials, and that is basically it's an electrical reaction when we look at transmission of neurotransmitters that happens. So this is focusing on the electrical chemistry in a way. I like giving analogies to patients, right? It's an easy kind of way to look at it and how it's working. Like I talked about the construction foreman calling a construction crew to fix the potholes on the highway when we were talking about ketamine and building those pathways again. TMS is more akin to like, let's say you have a pathway that you want to build and there's a field and you drove a Jeep 150,000 times back and forth over the course of 2 months on the same place, you're going to build a pathway there, right? So it's a slower approach. The end result is still neuroplasticity. You're building pathways and regenerating those neuronal highways in the parts of the brain that are causing it. So we basically like map out the brain. There's two types of TMS. There's RTMS and deep TMS. The difference between deep TMS and ours, basically the manufacturer of the machine, the way that, think of it as like you sit on a chair and there's like a magnetic coil that pushes a pulse train, a magnetic field pulse train into the part of the brain that we're trying to target, and it's different targets for different conditions, and then it activates all the neurons in that portion. It causes them to depolarize and does that hundreds of times. So it's typically a 20-minute treatment. The RTMS, it's more of a stiletto heel going in, and it's a paddle instead of a helmet. And I think the outcomes are a little better on deep TMS because it's a wider field, deeper penetration. So if you move the paddle a little bit and you're not touching the target area, you lose efficacy. The helmet approach of it being kind of strapped on, going deeper, and it's more of a wider mallet at the end, so it's harder to not be at the target. And a lot of machines have different ways of figuring that out. They all have different technologies, but the bottom line is once you map it, you deliver. It's like a 20-minute treatment, standard protocol, 5 days a week, and we do 36 treatments. So it takes a couple months to get through it. But you can drive. It doesn't alter you. Makes it easier to come in and out. Within half an hour, you're in and out of the clinic. Very easy to tolerate. No systemic side effects. It's very localized. Sometimes headache or scalp tenderness, but generally speaking, it's a very well tolerated. And the efficacy, depending on the study, can range between 60 and 80%. So it's in the same ballpark as ketamine, and so it's really efficacious, and it is covered by insurances in the U.S. specifically, like treatment-resistant depression, and it's also approved for OCD. Now, one manufacturer got approval for adolescent depression, late life depression, anxious depression, and smoking cessation. That's another indication for it. These are different like coils, different protocols. And the one beauty of TMS is it's all about like how many pulse trains we deliver at what frequency. And if we change the protocols, we can do it in 3 minutes instead of 20 minutes as a data burst. And sometimes that even, I know like Brainsway, the manufacturer of the machine that makes deep TMS machine, the ones we use, they're actually studying it for like an accelerated protocol, because 36 treatments over 2 months is a lot for some people. But if you give, let's say, 2 treatments a day, you can move that down like in half the time. Or if you do 5 treatments per day and do that over 6 treatment days over 2 weeks, you get relatively the same outcomes. So they're studying accelerated protocols. And we'll talk about the synergistic part next, but we actually can mix and match and why we do that. But so it's good. In Europe, there are a lot more indications for TMS, Alzheimer's, traumatic brain injury, PTSD. So it's all about, which manufacturers have studied it for what indication, but there are a lot of potential. We've used it off-label for long COVID, migraines, MS fatigue, a lot of different indications for it. Some people even advocate just to use it for wellness because of the neuroplasticity you get.
Amazing. I did not know a lot of that, Abid. Thank you. That was fantastic. So let's start to weave it together. How, in the real world, with real patients and people in your clinic, how would you integrate some of them having different protocols, say with Spravato, or IV, ketamine, or TMS? What have you found can work sometimes just to I guess, from a biological brain perspective, but also from a healing and trauma-informed perspective? What are some good protocols that you've used and seen so far?
So, one thing, we talked a little bit about ketamine and Spravato relation. That's a lot about access to care, logistics, affordability, experience. So, and sometimes people might move from ketamine over into Spravato for their maintenance, all that. But now TMS, you add that to the mix. So first of all, patient, like it's patient driven, the choice ultimately, because they're all different. Like, can somebody do the 36 treatments for TMS? You're in and out quick, but some people logistically can't do that, and they might then be more looking at ketamine. So we look at all that. But let's say you're on, like, if you have more suicide, like more acute suicidality happening, or a lot of trauma specifically, we tend to lean towards ketamine or Spravato in those scenarios,
Right.
um, because they're quicker acting. They work on fast-gated NMDA receptor channels, whereas TMS actually works on the slow-gated channels. So one big difference, TMS, you're done with it and it's got great results, the benefits last longer, right? They're more durable. Some people can go a year, or some can go 2 years without needing more TMS. I mean, a good 60% of people might even make it out to that 1 year mark. Some people need it quicker and repeat maintenance treatments, but generally speaking, compared to ketamine and Spravato, it's a lot more durable. So let's say they are maybe on ketamine or Spravato and struggle. Maybe they're on ketamine, they can't get their interval very long between treatments, or their Spravato can't get from 1 week to every 2 weeks, or their depression is all controlled, but their anxiety is left over. Things like that. Like there's residual anxiety symptom. Sometimes even unmasking the anxiety because you're not depressed anymore.
Right.
You're not focused on the depression. And now it's almost a spotlight on the anxiety that's there. So in a lot of those scenarios, we'll look at TMS sometimes as an augmenting agent. Either the best is when you just do a full standard protocol, 36 treatments, 4 to 5 treatments a week, several weeks. There are different ways to do it, but that kind of standard protocol in parallel to doing your Spravato or ketamine. And then you start seeing the anxiety resolve, or you start seeing that their interval between Spravato or ketamine treatments can go longer and longer. So we call it an extender. Now, some people can't do the TMS protocol just logistically, but then we have another way we do it where we'll take a 3-minute TMS session called a theta burst stimulation, and we'll do it only the day they come in for their ketamine or Spravato, and right before they go into their ketamine or
Oh,
Spravato
wow.
treatment.
You combine
And
those two on the
it's
same
an
day.
yeah, it primes the
Mhm.
brain in a way, like neurologically. Your base experience can be a little different too with the ketamine or Spravato once you do a theta burst right before it, but it's almost like priming your NMDA receptors and getting the environment ready. And we use that as an extender to make the longer intervals between ketamine and Spravato treatments, or to get rid of the residual symptoms. So those are two different ways we kind of augment it, but that's how we look at it. What does their insurance cover? What can they afford? What have they tried? What is their comfortable, like what are they comfortable with? Some people are just not as comfortable with altered states and dissociative experiences, and they opt for TMS. And some people will be a lot more kind of hesitant on TMS. I always want to clarify, TMS is not ECT, electroconvulsive
Mhm.
therapy. It's not shock treatment. We're not putting in electricity. It's a magnet pulse train, very tolerated outpatient, done super easily. It's a completely different treatment. So, and you just sit there on a chair, come in, and you get to know in 20 minutes you're in and out. But very different. So there's a lot of more studies happening in this field of synergistic combinations, and I think that's an exciting space going forward to see what kind of outcomes can we get on a larger scale by studying it.
I've got one more question. Let's see how you can answer this. We're looking to the future now. So, what you were just talking about really is moving towards precision psychiatry, identifying for each patient what's going to help them the most, what's really going to move the needle for this person. And so we've got the treatments you've discussed so far. Looking ahead, Abid, let's talk more broadly about psychedelics like MDMA, LSD, psilocybin, also neuroimaging and biomarkers and some genetic testing and AI. Where do you hope and feel that the kind of the discipline that we're in of integrative, interventional psychiatry, precision psychiatry will go in the future around some of these new treatments?
Yeah, no, it's an exciting time in the field for sure. And I think that I'm kind of looking at maybe a future state of where everything you mentioned is so relevant. And I think they're all going to be interconnected in the future, but meaning that in the neuromodulation space, there are going to be a lot more indications, a lot better technology, in targeting the right part of the brain, being able to be more flexible and versatile, understanding the various TMS hertz frequencies we can use and protocols we can use for different conditions. And that'll be an easier kind of adoption in terms of you have this kind of symptom set, you have this symptom set, this type of delivery of this. It'll become evolved, that field, because that field is growing really quickly. And then you look at like the psychedelic and the neuroplastic world. Most things on a chemical side that are under development and studies are looking at glutamate neuroplasticity now. And I think we'll continue to see products that come out that will be accessible and work on competitors to Spravato. I'm sure at some point, I hope I see IV ketamine at some point getting FDA approval to be a regulated treatment available and that means maybe insurance covered. Some insurance plans out there, there's not many, but some do cover it for mental health, even without the FDA approval yet. And then psychedelics, I know we thought by now we might have one approved, and MDMA didn't get its approval. I think it will eventually, and I think the data is still very compelling. And I think it'll be a domino effect that once one is approved, it'll really open the door for many more. And probably in the US go the route of a state by state toppling, in a way, kind of how the cannabis industry was. We already know psychedelics are approved, and it's approved in Oregon, and there's more states coming online, and municipalities that have decriminalized it. Some have approved it for medical use. So there's a House and Senate bill in Illinois that's on the docket too. So I think that's how it's going to become the right to try laws and ability. We need those kind of treatments available. The data is compelling, and I know we need more safety data, but if done right, I think I see a future where you could have different types of psychedelics for different conditions. Ibogaine got some good data on opioid use disorder. DMTs for depression is a shorter experience, a lot easier to maybe possibly in the future administer in a clinic. But then when you look at layer, how does all this fit together? It really goes, you said things like biomarkers. I think the concept of biomarkers, inflammatory involved, like the inflammatory system, inflammation changes, like we'll get more and more functional medicine, outcomes, biomarkers, who will respond to what kind of treatment better. And I think that'll all be mediated with AI, basically. The AI, we use AI in our clinics, we use it for ambient scribing, meaning to help make notes easily. I mean, it's amazing. It's like somebody can just the computer just listen to it and spit out a wonderful note, so we can be attentive to the patient and focus on that and not worry about clicks and buttons in the EHR. But it's going to go beyond that. It'll be the ability for, I think, AI to be able to sift through the data of a patient in a chart and come up with guideline suggestions, diagnostic suggestions, biomarker, all link it to the biomarkers. I think AI will be the mediator of combining all this in the field. So end result, even with genetics, we do pharmacogenetic testing. We've been doing that for 10 years, looking at somebody's ability to respond to different medicines and their kinetics. But take AI to take all of that, bring it together to basically make an individualized approach that has a higher chance of success than the old kind of trial and error guinea pig approach, throwing things at the wall, hoping it sticks. It was like that in the early part of the career. It's just best guess kind of approaches. And I think we need precision now. So it's exciting time for sure.
Yeah, I'm excited listening to you. Thanks, Abid. That's great how you tied it all together. Thank you for coming on the show. Tell folks where to find you and more information about your clinics.
Appreciate you having me on. You can go to our website, Hopemark Health, or it's hopemarkhealth.com, HOPEMARK, or just hopemark.com. You can find me on the website for that, or you can go to my LinkedIn page, which is just under my name, Abid Nazeer.
Beautiful. Okay, Dr. Abid Nazeer, founder and chief medical officer of Hopemark Health. Thank you for being on the Healing Mindset podcast. It was lovely to catch up with you again. You're doing amazing work. So just onwards. Thank you, brother.
Appreciate you, David. I enjoyed the conversation.
All right. And thank you very much for listening. God bless everyone. Take care. Thanks again for watching. And thanks to our sponsor, Marpa Minds, a network of next generation mental health clinics offering Spravato and ketamine treatment for depression. Go to marpaminds.com for more information.